Really important role too.
We want to give you a clear picture,
Right.
insightful, hopefully fascinating, without getting bogged down in like super technical jargon.
Exactly. Understand the basics, the brilliant mechanisms,
Mm.
because this system, it runs constantly,
Before you're even born, right?
all the way through life, nonstop. And the efficiency is just, wow, it's extraordinary. Just to give you a taste, a little wow factor.
Yeah. Did you know your blood can carry 40 times more oxygen than if that oxygen was just, dissolved in the liquid part?
40 times, seriously.
40 times. It's because of one specific, highly specialized component we're definitely going to get into.
Wow. Okay, that alone is pretty amazing. 40 times. Let's dive right in then. Let's unpack this internal highway, starting with the big picture.
Let's do it. So, section 1, your internal highway. At its core, the circulatory system is that specialized transport system for complex organisms like us.
Like we said, essential because our cells can't just grab stuff from the outside air.
Right. And it's not just one fluid doing all the work, although blood is definitely the star player.
Yeah, blood gets all the press.
It does. But the system actually manages several vital fluids. There's blood, obviously, inside the blood vessels. It makes up a good chunk of your body weight.
How much? Like percentage-wise?
Around 7.5%.
Yeah.
Which, for an average adult, works out to roughly 5 liters circulating all the time.
5 liters. That's quite a lot of liquid constantly moving around inside you.
It is, yeah. Yeah, substantial volume. Then, beyond blood, you've got lymph.
Okay, lymph. That's in its own set of vessels, right? The lymphatic system.
Correct. Its own network, the lymphatic vessels. And then there's the tissue fluid, which is super important, also called interstitial fluid.
Interstitial, okay. And where is that?
It's basically everywhere between your cells. It surrounds all your body cells, filling those tiny gaps. And it actually accounts for more of your body weight than blood does.
Really? More than blood?
Yeah, about 15%.
Interesting.
Yeah. And just for context, the fluid inside your cells, the intracellular fluid that's even more, maybe 40% of body weight, but that stuff stays put inside the cells.
Right, it's not circulating around like blood or lymph.
Exactly. The circulatory system mainly deals with moving blood and lymph, and it plays a huge role in managing that tissue fluid too.
Okay, clear. Blood in blood vessels, lymph in lymph vessels, tissue fluid bathing the cells. So with all this fluid moving around, what are the absolute core functions? Why is this system so critical like every single second?
Well, the functions are absolutely vital. The most obvious one is transport. It's the body's main delivery service.
Delivering the essentials.
Exactly. Oxygen from your lungs gets delivered to every cell. Nutrients you absorb after eating glucose, fats, amino acids, vitamins, all transported to the cells needing them for energy or building blocks or repair.
And it's not just deliveries, it's pickups too, right? Waste removal.
Absolutely. It's a two-way street. Cells make waste products just by, doing their jobs. Metabolism.
Like carbon dioxide.
Carbon dioxide, yeah. That's a big one. Urea from breaking down proteins. Bilirubin from breaking down old red blood cells. All that waste gets picked up and carried away by the circulation.
To where? Where does it take the trash?
To the specific organs that can handle it. The lungs get rid of the CO2. Kidneys filter out urea into urine. The liver deals with bilirubin, putting it into bile.
Okay. And it carries messages too, like hormones.
Yes. Hormones are those powerful chemical signals made by glands. Blood carries them all over the body to their specific target organs or tissues. It's how different parts of the body coordinate complex functions.
It's like the body's internal mail service for messages.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
And what's really clever is how it handles things that don't dissolve well in water, because plasma, mostly water.
Like fats.
Like fats, yeah, or certain other molecules. The system binds them to special carrier proteins like albumin, sort of like giving them a little taxi ride through the bloodstream.
That's smart. Solves a basic chemistry problem. Okay, so transport is huge. What else?
It's also crucial for maintaining internal balance, homeostasis.
Keeping things stable inside.
Exactly. Blood circulation helps regulate things like the osmotic balance, the water and salt concentration and acidity, the pH level. Keeps everything in that narrow sweet spot cells need to work properly.
So it's not just a delivery system, it's also like the body's internal climate control and chemical regulator.
You could definitely say that. And speaking of climate control, heat regulation is another big one. Blood moves heat around the body very efficiently.
To keep our temperature steady?
Yep. Helps distribute warmth, maintain that constant core body temp. If you get too hot, more blood flows to the skin to radiate heat away. Too cold, blood flow shifts away from the skin to keep the core warm.
Clever. And defense. You mentioned defense earlier.
Yes. Absolute critical. Protection and defense, that's mainly the job of the white blood cells, the leukocytes. They circulate in the blood but can also move out into the tissues.
The immune system's mobile units.
That's a great way to put it. They hunt down and destroy invaders like bacteria, or they make antibodies for targeted attacks.
The body's security force, patrolling the highways. And one more thing, stopping leaks.
Essential. Protection against blood loss. If a blood vessel gets damaged, a cut or internal injury, the system has to plug that leak fast.
Clotting.
The blood clotting, exactly. Enabled by platelets and certain proteins in the plasma, like fibrinogen. It's a built-in emergency repair kit.
Wow. Okay, so transport, balance, temperature, defense, and repair. It's doing a lot all at once. A truly integrated system. Let's zoom in on the blood itself now.
All right, section 2. Blood more than just red. As we said, blood's about 55% liquid plasma and 45% cells suspended in it.
And those cells have very specific jobs.
Very specific. And the vast majority, like overwhelmingly the majority, are the red blood cells, erythrocytes.
The ones that make blood red.
Exactly. They make up about 95% of all the blood cells. They have that distinctive shape, right, like a disc, but indented on both sides.
Biconcave. Biconcave, why that shape? Does it help?
It probably does, yeah. It increases the surface area for gas exchange, and it makes them flexible. They're pretty small, about 7.5 micrometers across.
Where do they come from?
They originate from stem cells deep inside your bones in the red bone marrow, places like your sternum, your ribs, your vertebrae.
And you said they're flexible.
Remarkably so. That biconcave shape and their membrane allow them to deform easily, squeeze through the absolute narrowest capillaries, sometimes even narrower than the cell itself. Essential for reaching everywhere.
Wow. And they're weird cells, right? Don't they lose parts?
They do, yeah. Mature red blood cells in mammals, like us, are unique. They actually get rid of their nucleus.
No nucleus.
No nucleus.
Yeah.
And no mitochondria either.
No powerhouses. That seems counterintuitive for a cell. Why ditch those? The source doesn't spell it out, but what's the likely reason?
It's a fascinating adaptation. Probably two main reasons. One, maximizing space. Getting rid of the nucleus and mitochondria leaves almost the entire cell volume free to be packed with hemoglobin.
Hemoglobin, that's the key molecule.
That's the key molecule for oxygen transport. And the second reason, without mitochondria, red blood cells can't do aerobic respiration. Meaning they don't use the oxygen they're carrying. They're pure delivery trucks, not dipping into the cargo themselves. Very clever design.
That makes perfect sense. Specialized careers. And hemoglobin, that's what gives the massive oxygen boost you mentioned, the 40 times thing.
That's the one. Hemoglobin is the protein, the red blood pigment. Oxygen doesn't actually dissolve well in water, which is most of plasma, but because red blood cells are stuffed with hemoglobin.
Blood can carry way, way more oxygen, 40 times more.
Exactly. It's an incredible increase in efficiency.
How does hemoglobin work? How does it grab and release oxygen?
It has this amazing property. It binds oxygen really easily where there's lots of it, like in your lungs, high oxygen concentration.
Okay.
But then in your tissues, where cells are using up oxygen and the concentration is low, hemoglobin lets go of the oxygen easily, releases it right where it's needed.
So it adjusts its grip based on the location, picks up easily, drops off easily.
Precisely. That differential binding is its whole job. That's the primary function of red blood cells.
And they don't live forever, these cells.
No, they have a limited lifespan, usually around 100 to 120 days.
Then what?
Then, as they get older and less flexible, they get filtered out, broken down, mostly in the liver and the spleen.
Does the body recycle the parts?
Oh, yeah, very efficiently. The iron for the hemoglobin is reused. The protein parts are broken down and reused, too. The leftover bit, the heme group, gets converted into a yellow pigment called bilirubin.
Bilirubin, I've heard of that.
Yeah, the liver processes it and puts it into bile. Bile helps digest fats, and the bilirubin eventually gets eliminated in your feces, giving it its characteristic color.
Huh. And if you don't have enough hemoglobin or red blood cells, that's anemia, right?
Correct. Anemia means your blood's oxygen-carrying capacity is reduced. That's why people with anemia often feel tired. Weak tissues aren't getting enough oxygen.
Is there a way to measure red blood cell levels easily?
Yeah, a common test is the hematocrit value, HT for short.
Hematocrit. What's that measuring exactly?
It measures the percentage of your total blood volume that's actually made up of red blood cells.
How do they do that?
It's pretty straightforward. Take a blood sample, spin it down in a centrifuge. The heavier red blood cells pack at the bottom. You measure the height of that red cell layer compared to the total blood height.
Ah, so it shows how packed your blood is with red cells.
Exactly. And there are typical ranges. For men, it's usually about 40% to 54%. For women, it's a bit lower, maybe 37% to 47%.
Why is it different?
Hormones play a role. and also things like menstruation in women.
Interesting. Okay, so red blood cells dominate, 95% of the cells, all about oxygen. What about the tiny fraction left? White blood cells and platelets.
Right, white blood cells or leukocytes are much rarer, only about 0.1% of blood cells, but absolutely vital for your immune system.
The defense force we talked about?
That's them. There are different types: neutrophils, eosinophils, basophils, monocytes, lymphocytes. Each has specific jobs.
Like what?
Some engulf invaders directly phagocytosis. Others, like lymphocytes, make antibodies, those specific proteins that target particular germs.
And doctors can tell things by looking at the numbers of these different white cells.
Absolutely. It's called a differential count. They count how many of each type there are. It used to be manual, looking at blood smears under a microscope. Now it's mostly automated.
What can it tell them?
Well, the source gives examples. Like if you have more lymphocytes than usual, it might suggest inflammation or a viral infection.
Okay.
Or if you have a lot of eosinophils, that could point towards allergies, or maybe even parasitic worms. It's a really useful diagnostic clue. You can even see visual differences sometimes, like poorly filled red cells in anemia, or weird-looking white cells in leukemia.
Amazing how much info you can get from those relatively few cells. What about the last bit, the platelets? They're about 5%.
Yeah, platelets or thrombocytes, they're not even really whole cells, more like little fragments broken off from bigger cells in the bone marrow.
And their job is?
Clotting. They're the first responders when a blood vessel gets damaged. Essential for stopping bleeding. The clotting crew.
The clotting crew, I like that. Okay, so that's the 45% cellular stuff. What about the other 55%, the liquid part? Plasma.
Right, blood plasma. It's the liquid matrix holding everything else. You took out all the cells, plasma is what's left.
And it's mostly water.
About 90% water, yeah. But dissolved in that water is a whole complex soup of other things.
Like what?
Well, about 7% is plasma proteins. Then you got salts, like sodium chloride, about 0.9%. Nutrients from your food glucose, fats, amino acids. Vitamins make up maybe 1%. Plus hormones, dissolved gases like CO2, waste products like urea and bilirubin. It carries everything.
A very busy soup. And those proteins, they do more than just float around.
Oh, definitely. The most common one is albumin. It's super important for maintaining what's called colloidal osmotic pressure, or SCADE.
SCADE. What's that do?
It's basically a pressure created by the proteins dissolved in the plasma, and it plays a huge role in controlling fluid movement between the blood vessels and the tissues around them. We'll come back to that. Albumin also helps transport fatty things.
Okay, CAD, fluid balance. Got it. Other proteins.
You have globulins. Some of
Yeah.
these are immunoglobulins, which are antibodies made by lymphocytes, part of your immune defense.
Antibodies.
Right. And then there's fibrinogen.
Fibrinogen sounds like it makes fibrin for clotting.
Exactly. Fibrinogen is a soluble protein just floating around. But when you need to clot, a whole cascade of reactions happens. An enzyme called thrombin converts fibrinogen into insoluble threads of fibrin.
Like a net.
Exactly like a net. These fibrin threads trap blood cells, red cells, platelets, and form a solid plug, the clot, sealing the leak. Thrombokinase is involved in activating thrombin earlier in the process.
The physical structure of the clot.
Okay.
And the source mentions serum versus plasma. What's the difference?
Yeah, good point. Plasma is the blood fluid with all the clotting factors like fibrinogen still dissolved in it, ready to go.
Okay.
Serum is what you get after blood has clotted. When fibrinogen has been converted to fibrin and used up to form the clot, if you let blood clot in a tube, the yellowish liquid that separates out is serum. Plasma minus the clotting factors, essentially.
Got it. Plasma has the ingredients. Serum is the liquid left after the recipe's been made. Okay, that's blood covered. But it needs a pump, right? Something to push it all around.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Which brings us to section 3, the heart, the master pump. This is the engine driving everything. Structurally, it's like a double pump side by side.
Two halves.
Two halves. The right side handles the small loop, the pulmonary circulation. It takes deoxygenated blood from the body and pumps it just to the lungs.
To pick up oxygen.
Right. Then the left side handles the big loop, the systemic circulation. It gets that fresh oxygenated blood from the lungs and pumps it forcefully to the entire rest of the body.
Head to toes.
Everything. And each half has 2 chambers. In upper one, the atrium that receives blood.
Like a waiting room.
Sort of, yeah. And a lower, much more muscular chamber, the ventricle, that does the heavy pumping out.
And keeping blood flowing the right way needs valves, right? Like one-way doors.
Crucial. 4 valves in total, preventing backflow. There are 2 main types. You've got the semilunar valves.
Semilunar. Half moon.
Yeah, they look like little half-moon pockets. There are the exits of the ventricles, where the pulmonary artery leaves the right ventricle. and the aorta leaves the left ventricle.
How do they work?
When the ventricles squeeze blood out, the valves open. When the ventricles relax, if blood tries to flow backward from the arteries, it fills those little pockets and they snap shut, sealing the exit.
Clever. Stops blood falling back into the pump. What's the other type?
The atrioventricular valves, or AV valves, they're between the atria and ventricles on each side. They're described as strong but thin flaps.
And they have little strings attached.
They do. Tendinous cords, like tiny ropes. They anchor the edges of these valves to the muscle walls inside the ventricles.
Why the ropes?
Ingenious reason. When the ventricles contract really forcefully, the pressure inside gets super high. Without those cords, the pressure could just blow the thin AV valves backward, inside out, into the atria.
Ah, so the cords hold them steady.
Exactly, like guy ropes on a tent. They stop the valves from prolapsing, ensuring all the blood goes forward into the arteries, not backward into the atria.
Brilliant engineering for that constant pressure cycle. And the heart wall itself must be tough.
It is. Built for nonstop work. It has layers. The inner lining is the endocardium, smooth, reduces friction. The valves are actually formed from folds of this layer.
Smooth lining for smooth flow. What's the main muscle part?
That's the myocardium, the thick muscular layer. That's where the pumping power comes from. It's cardiac muscle striated. Looks a bit like skeletal muscle, but it's involuntary, thankfully.
We don't have to think about making it beat. And isn't there a big difference in thickness between the sides?
Yes, absolutely. The source highlights this. The myocardium of the left ventricle is much thicker than the right ventricles.
Why is that?
It's all about workload. The left ventricle has to pump blood against much higher resistance all the way through the entire body's systemic circulation. Big job.
Needs more power.
Needs way more power. The right ventricle just pumps to the nearby lungs, shorter trip, lower pressure. So, less muscle needed.
Makes sense. Now, the heart is full of blood, but does the heart muscle itself need its own blood supply?
Critically important point. Yes, it absolutely does. The myocardium is working constantly, needs tons of oxygen and fuel. It can't just absorb it from the blood passing through the chambers.
Well, it has its own plumbing.
It has its own dedicated blood supply system, the coronary arteries.
Ah, the ones involved in heart attacks.
Exactly. They branch right off the aorta near the beginning and spread out over the heart surface, diving into the muscle. They form a dense capillary network feeding the heart muscle itself.
Delivering oxygen and nutrients?
Yep. Then coronary veins, like the great cardiac vein, collect the used blood and return it to the right atrium. A blockage in these coronary arteries is what causes a heart attack. Part of the heart muscle dies from lack of oxygen.
Amazing that the pump needs its own separate fuel lines. Okay, so how does it actually beat the pumping cycle?
The source really focuses on the power stroke, called systole, specifically ventricular systole. That's when both ventricles contract forcefully at the same time.
Squeezing the blood out.
Exactly. The contraction starts at the bottom, the apex, and moves upwards, squeezes blood into the aorta from the left ventricle and into the pulmonary artery from the right.
And the valves, what are they doing during systole?
During the squeeze, the exit valves, the semilunar ones, are forced open, but the AV valves between the atria and ventricles are snapped shut, held by those cords, preventing backflow into the atria.
Okay. What about the atria while the ventricles are squeezing?
While the ventricles are busy contracting and emptying, systole, the atria are relaxed and filling up with blood coming back from the body and lungs, getting ready for the next beat.
So systole is the big push. Diastole, the relaxation and filling phase, must follow that, right? Since they mentioned diastolic pressure later.
Right. Diastole is the relaxation filling part. But the key force driving circulation comes from that powerful ventricular systole. That's what generates the pressure wave.
That pressure wave then travels through the vessels, which takes us nicely to
Section 4.
4.
Blood vessels, the pipes and channels. This network is vast, reaching literally everywhere.
The plumbing of the body.
Pretty much. 3 main types. Arteries carry blood away from the heart, veins carry blood back to the heart, and capillaries are the tiny connectors in the tissues where the action happens. Exchange, exactly. Now, arteries and veins, the bigger pipes, share a basic 3-layer structure. Mostly.
What are the layers?
Innermost is the tunica intima, smooth lining of endothelial cells, plus a bit of elastic tissue. Keeps blood flowing smoothly.
Like Teflon coating.
Kind of. Middle layer is the tunica media. This has elastic tissue and smooth muscle. And this is where arteries and veins differ significantly.
How so?
In arteries, especially big ones, the tunica media is thick, strong, very elastic, often layered. In veins, it's much thinner, looser, reflects the pressure difference.
Arteries need to handle high pressure. Makes sense. What's the outer layer?
Tunica adventitia. Loose connective tissue anchors the vessel. Thicker in bigger vessels. Interestingly, the source notes that even muscles get their blood supply via capillaries in the connective tissue around them, not directly into the muscle cells.
Huh. Okay, let's focus on arteries. High pressure, away from the heart, different types.
Yes. The biggest ones, like the aorta coming right off the heart, are elastic arteries. Their tunica media is packed with elastic tissue
Why so elastic?
to act as pressure reservoirs. They stretch massively when the heart pumps blood into them during systole. This absorbs the pressure surge, stops it getting dangerously high.
Like a shock absorber.
Exactly. Then, between heartbeats, when the heart relaxes, diastole, that stretched elastic wall recoils, squeezes back down.
And that pushes the blood forward.
Yes, it maintains pressure and keeps blood flowing continuously even when the heart isn't actively pumping. It smooths out the flow, that pulse you feel. That's this stretching and recoiling wave traveling down the elastic artery.
So they're active participants, not just passive pipes. Cool. What about smaller arteries?
As arteries branch and get smaller, they become muscular arteries, and then the smallest are arterioles. Here, the tunica media has much more smooth muscle.
Muscle means they can contract.
Precisely. They can change their diameter. Relaxing the muscle widens the vessel vasodilation. Contracting the muscle narrows it vasoconstriction.
And why is that important?
It's how the body controls where blood goes. It redirects flow based on need. The source gives great examples.
Like exercise.
Perfect example. During exercise, muscles need tons more blood, so arterioles going to muscles and skin vasodilate open wide.
Yeah?
Blood rushes there. At the same time, arterioles to your digestive system might vasoconstrict, narrow down. Digestion isn't the priority right then.
And after a meal, it's the opposite. Blood goes to the gut.
Exactly. Blood flow shunted to the digestive system. It's dynamic control. But downside. If too many arterioles vasodilate massively all at once,
Uh-oh.
the pressure plummets. Acute hypotension can lead to shock, not enough blood flow to vital organs.
Because the container got too big for the volume of fluid.
Okay, so arteries. High pressure, elastic near the heart, muscular further out to control flow. What about the return trip? Veins.
Right, veins, the return trip. They bring blood back. Much thinner walls than arteries. Blood pressure inside them is way lower. Maybe 22 mmHg compared to much higher in arteries.
So low pressure. How does blood get back up, especially from your legs, against gravity? Good question. It's a challenge. The heart relaxing does create a little suction, but not enough. The big helper, especially in the limbs, is the muscle pump.
Muscle pump
Yeah, when your leg muscles contract, like when you walk, they squeeze the veins running through them.
pushes the blood upwards.
Just like squeezing a tube of toothpaste.
Yeah.
Pushes the blood along towards the heart.
But what stops it falling back down between squeezes?
Valves. That's the other key. Veins, even the small venules, have one-way valves all along their length.
Like the heart valves, but in the veins.
Similar principle. Flaps that let blood flow towards the heart, but snap shut if it tries to flow backward due to gravity. The muscle pump pushes blood past a valve, the valve closes behind it. Step-by-step return.
So veins, low pressure, thin walls, rely on muscle pumps, need valves. Got it. That leaves the tiny ones. Capillaries.
Capillaries, the exchange zone. Smallest, most numerous vessels form dense networks everywhere. Diameter is minuscule, about 0.008 millimeter. Red cells squeeze through single file.
And their walls are super thin.
Extremely thin. Just a single layer of endothelial cells, basically, maybe a whisper of connective tissue
Why so thin?
for exchange. This is where the deliveries and pickups happen between blood and tissues. The thin walls are permeable to water, small solutes, oxygen, CO2, glucose, waste. But not permeable to big things like red blood cells or large proteins.
So this is the actual interface, the business end.
Exactly. This is where the magic happens. Oxygen and nutrients pass out of the capillary into the surrounding fluid. Waste products pass from that fluid back into the capillary, all driven by concentration gradients and pressure differences across that thin wall.
And that surrounding fluid is the tissue fluid.
Precisely. Which leads us right into Section 5. Tissue fluid and lymph, the middlemen, and the cleanup crew. Tissue fluid, or interstitial fluid, fills the gaps between cells. It's the essential go-between.
The medium for exchange, how does it get there in the first place?
It actually leaks out of the capillaries.
Yep.
At the arterial end of the capillary, where blood pressure is still relatively high.
The pressure pushes fluid out?
Yes. The hydrostatic pressure, the blood pressure, forces water and small solutes out to the capillary wall into the tissue space. Red cells and big proteins mostly stay inside the capillary.
Okay, so fluid leaks out. Does it just build up?
No, because there's another force at play. Remember those plasma proteins like albumin stuck inside the capillary?
Yeah.
They create that colloidal osmotic pressure, the COD. It acts like a sponge, trying to pull water back into the capillary.
This is push out versus pull in?
Exactly. At the arterial end, the push, blood pressure, is stronger than the pull, COD, so fluid moves out. But as blood flows along, pressure drops. And because fluid left, the protein concentration inside increases, making the pull stronger.
Ah, so at the venous end.
At the venous end, the blood pressure is lower, but the COD, the pull-in, is now stronger. So most of the fluid that leaked out gets pulled back into the capillary.
A neat balance. Push out, pull back in.
Mostly balanced, but it's not perfect. A small amount of fluid, about 2 liters a day, plus maybe some leaked proteins, doesn't get pulled back into the blood capillaries.
2 liters a day left over. Where does that go?
That's where the lymphatic system kicks in. This excess tissue fluid enters tiny lymphatic capillaries. Once inside, it's called lymph.
So lymph is basically recycled tissue fluid.
Pretty much. And unlike blood vessels, a loop, lymph vessels are mainly a one-way drainage system. They collect this excess fluid and protein.
Drainage pipes. Where do they drain to?
They merge into bigger and bigger lymphatic vessels, eventually forming 2 large ducts. These ducts empty the collected lymph back into the bloodstream, into large veins near your collarbones. So the lost fluid gets returned.
Prevents swelling, I guess. And the lymphatic system does more than just drainage, right? Immune stuff.
Big time. It's packed with lymphatic organs, lymph nodes, the spleen, thymus, tonsils. Critical for immunity.
Lymph nodes, those are the lumps that swell up.
Exactly. They're like filters stationed along the lymph vessels. Lymph flows through them, and inside are immune cells, phagocytes that eat debris and germs, and lymphocytes that make antibodies.
Cleaning the lymph before it goes back to the blood.
Precisely. Neutralizing threats. That's why nodes in your neck or armpits swell during infection. They're busy fighting whatever's in the lymph, draining from that area.
Checkpoints. What about the spleen? That's lymphatic too.
Yes, the largest lymphatic organ. Upper left abdomen have multiple jobs, makes lymphocytes, filters blood, breaking down old red blood cells.
Recycles.
Red cells, yeah. And it acts as a blood reservoir. It can store blood and then contract, squeezing extra blood into circulation during intense exercise, for example.
Is that what causes a side stitch sometimes? That contraction?
The source suggests that's very likely the cause. The spleen contracting to boost blood volume might cause that sharp pain.
Wow. That explains a lot. Spleen, immunity, recycling, blood reserve, and stitch inducer. Okay, so we have fluid, pump, pipes, exchange, drainage, cleanup. What about the force itself? Blood pressure.
Right, section 6, blood pressure, the force of circulation. Simply put, it's the pressure blood exerts on vessel walls, and it fluctuates.
With the heartbeat, 2 numbers, right? Systolic and diastolic.
Correct. Systolic is the higher number, the peak pressure during ventricular contraction. Systole, when the heart is squeezing. Normal range is roughly 180 mmHg. Depends on how hard the heart contracts and how elastic the big arteries
A
are.
treacherous factor again, and a
No.
lower number.
Diastolic, the lowest pressure during heart relaxation, diastole, when the ventricles are filling. Normal range, about 60-90 mmHg. This is influenced more by the blood volume and something called peripheral resistance.
Peripheral resistance, that's the friction in the smaller vessels, arterioles.
Exactly. The resistance blood meets flowing through those narrow arterioles and capillaries. If those arterioles constrict, vasoconstriction,
Resistance goes up.
resistance goes up, and that pushes the diastolic pressure up because blood can't flow out into the capillaries as easily during the heart's relaxation phase.
And high blood pressure, hypertension is bad news.
Very bad news long term. Increases risk of heart disease, stroke, damages vessels. The source links it to a few things.
Like what?
Well, as people age, arteries can get less elastic, stiffer. That tends to raise systolic pressure.
Okay.
And anything causing widespread vasoconstriction of arterioles increases peripheral resistance, raising diastolic pressure. Lifestyle factors play a big role here.
What kind of factors?
The source lists things like too much alcohol, smoking, eating a lot of salt, even eating licorice can affect some people's blood pressure.
Licorice. Okay, so blood pressure is this complex balance, heart strength, artery stretchiness, blood volume, how tight or loose the arterioles are.
All influenced by age, genetics, lifestyle.
Yeah,
Keeping it in a healthy range is incredibly important for the whole system.
absolutely. Wow, we've covered a huge amount of ground. From the idea of an internal highway through the blood itself, plasma, red cells carrying oxygen, white cells defending, platelets clotting.
To the amazing heart pump, the valves, the difference between the left and right side, its own coronary supply.
Navigating the vessel's elastic arteries, buffering pressure, muscular arterioles directing traffic, veins using pumps and valves for the return trip, and the crucial capillaries for exchange.
And finally, understanding tissue fluid as the middleman and lymph as the cleanup crew.